Senators, you have a choice now. You don't need state sponsorship. I can't stop you from doing anything you want to do. You want to drive off a cliff? Drive off a cliff. You want to slit your wrists? Slit your wrists. I can't stop you. So this notion that you need state sponsorship to deliver, I just don't need to have to approve what you choose. You know, I can't prosecute you later and put you in jail after you're gone. So this idea that you don't have a choice and somehow because I respect life and I want you to live and I want to support your life and I want to empower your life doesn't mean I'm trying to steal your choice. Look, I get it. The one common thing we've heard here tonight or to this afternoon is people fear pain. But nobody should be encouraged to take their life because their doctor has failed to manage their pain. Nobody should be pushed to take their life because they feel that they're going to be in pain and die a horrible death. We heard from our pharmacist colleague from Riverside, who talked about the pain meds available and the therapies and all the things that we can do to manage that pain to ensure. You know, I have one of those dreaded personal stories, a story that I don't care to share very often. In fact, this is a rare occasion. I was disabled for a number of years. I couldn't provide for my family. I couldn't provide for my children. And I was a burden on my family. You see, I wasn't terminal. I could lay there lingering, eating, stealing resources from my children's future, pushing us out of our home and into the streets, trying to survive and pay for my health care. You bet I thought about suicide. You bet I did. I love my kids. I love my wife. How can you look them in the face and say, I want to steal your future because I'm so self-centered that I'm more important than you? So of course, when you're told that you're terminal, you're going to be hit hard. You're going to start thinking about what's it all about, the depression that's going to hit you. And if you are a decent person, you're going to think about not putting your family through the pain of watching you die. You're going to think about not yourself, not the pain, but what will this do to my family? Will they be better off? If they don't have to go through this suffering that I'm going to put them through, will they be better off? That's what I fear in this bill, is we're encouraging that. We're pushing that. You know, you've heard arguments about the finances of it all. We all know in the last 2 years of your life, that's the most expensive time for health care. And people say, well, people are going to do it, and the insurance companies are going to encourage you to do it, and the doctor's going to encourage you to do it because it's going to save the state money, and after all, you're going to be a good citizen. Maybe there's going to be some of that. But I think it's more likely that you're going to look into your wife's eyes or your husband's eyes. You're going to look into your parents' eyes. You're going to look into your children's eyes. And you're going to say, I don't want to be a burden. I want to do what's best for them. I don't want to strip people of that hope. I don't want to strip them of their hope. I don't want to pile on to the guilt they feel for taking valuable resources from society and from their family to further their lives or to fight for their life. And most importantly, I don't want to prey on their good nature. You know, we had a bill last week, and I'm so proud of this body. It was the right to try. We voted to speed up drugs and therapies that could potentially save people's lives and give them hope. And that was so encouraging to me because I think this body should be lifting people's hope. We should be encouraging people to be the best they can. And you know, many of you have served with me for 9 years. You know, I'm the type of guy that you put into a barn full of manure and you give me a shovel, immediately I start digging because I'm looking for the horse. For me to have to face my family and to think that I'm stealing resources and maybe potentially limiting my children's education future because there won't be any money for college. And maybe we won't have a roof. You know, I only had a short bout of it, and I wasn't terminal. I can only imagine what it means to be terminal and have to go through the same mindset. And of course, like many other members here, I lost my mother to cancer. She was given weeks. She lasted years. And it was a horrible death, stomach cancer. She eventually starved to death, looked like a Holocaust victim. And I cherish every minute I had with her. Not that she could talk to me, but she gave me the courage. By seeing what she went through, she gave me the courage of hope. She encouraged me to be the best I could be. You know, many of you jokingly say I'm a workaholic. It's because I enjoy every precious minute here, and it's all fleeting. Whether it's tomorrow or whether it's 100 years from now, we're all going to pass away. And I don't want to do anything that the state sponsors to strip hope and add guilt to our citizens. I don't want to prey on their good nature. I want to build upon them. I want to give them hope and opportunity. And I tell you, the story of the woman, she was 29 years old that went to Oregon. And here we find out a month later, Duke University comes out with a report that in 2 cases of the trial, people were cured, 2 cures. And yet she took her life at the age of 29, stripped her husband of a wife, stripped her family of a daughter. And she thought she was doing the right thing. I don't think, when you read all the testimony, and I don't want to get into all that, you've all read that, you've well studied. And I want to say for the record, I know every member on this floor cares deeply about their constituents, and this bill was not brought forth out of malice, but out of love and concern for others. And I get that. And this is why so often we're divided, because there's more than one path to love and hope, and we're viewing it differently. We all bring different life experiences here. And through those filters, we view these bills and we view the future for California. But if that woman had held on for just a little longer, she would have had that hope, because there's a cure around the corner. Not just a therapy to improve her life, but to cure her life. We're moving by leaps and bounds. Just a short period ago, we all had home phones. Now we all carry cell phones. Just a short period ago, people died from simple operations that are now living. You know, I had a relative that had a heart attack recently, and it was amazing just in the time frame of when my father had heart problems and how far the technology's gone and how quickly he's improved and things are going well. Let's bet on hope. Let's put our energies on streamlining the things that help people live longer, fuller lives. Let's not sponsor death on this floor, even if it's good-natured. Let's not steal people's hope. Let's not pile on guilt. And most importantly, let's not prey on people's good nature. I urge a no vote.
Senator Nguyen.
Thank you, Madam President. Can I get permission to read and also ask a question, actually more of a clarification from the author?
Why don't you start with the permission to read, which is granted?
Thank you. Well, actually, it's part of it.
All right, then would you accept the question? This is directed to Senator Wolk. Senator Wolk, would you accept the question?
Yes, it could be to me or to Senator Monning, depending on what the issue is.
All right,
Thank you.
Whichever one of you decides to answer that question. So, Senator Nguyen.
Back in, I believe in the 90s, a new law lowered from 16 to 14 the age at which teens can be prosecuted and sentenced as adults on certain violent crimes. In your bill, you have it stated, permits a competent, qualified individual as defined who is an adult with a terminal disease to make a request to receive a prescription. Another section, it says prohibits a person from being a qualified individual based on age or disability. My question would be is, would a 16-year-old or 14-year-old,
No.
can they be qualified without a parent's consent in this,
No.
if this passes?
Answer is no.
Okay. Thank you.
Unequivocally, no.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Next, Senator Huff.
Thank you, Madam President, members. It's been an interesting and robust discussion, and evidently not concluded yet, as I know there'll be more speaking on it. But I thought I would try to address some of the issues that have been percolating around in my head. You know, we try to sanitize it some by calling assisted suicide or death with dignity or compassionate. You know, we throw a lot of terms out. You know, I heard aid and dying. Reality is, this is aid and killing. We had another term that was used out there, which was called healthcare professionals. Yet, what we're asking them to do is prescribe death. How is that a healthcare professional? Definitions matter, and certainly it is a way we try to sanitize the discussion to make something that by society for millennia has been something we don't really want to soft pedal. And we change the terms to try to make it more dignified. There's nothing dignified about dying. As has been said, we all do it. It's the last chapter of life. We're all born, we all die. The matter is, how? And that's really kind of what we're deciding here, and whether we can accelerate that process. You know, there's been some talk about CMA being neutral on this. And certainly, an organization that's 40,000 plus, with a decision made by 41, doesn't represent the desires of everybody in there. And certainly the AMA, which is the largest organization, medical organization, if I can find my notes here, have made comments about this. And they have approximately 225,000. Physician-assisted suicide is fundamentally incompatible with a physician's role as healer. Would be difficult or impossible to control, would pose serious societal risks. Instead of participating in assisted suicide, physicians must aggressively respond to the needs of patients at the end of life. Patients should not be abandoned once it's determined that cure is impossible. Multidisciplinary interventions should be sought, including specialty consultations, hospice care, pastoral counseling, and so on. And so that's the AMA. Another chapter out of history is that when this landmark bill was adopted, legislation was adopted in Oregon, the Oregon Medical Association was also on the sidelines. And yet, 3 years later, they attempted to reverse themselves because the physicians who were in charge of making this tough medical decision found it a little more difficult when it was reality than when it was theory. And so they sought unsuccessfully to change that because now they became the merchants of death, not the healthcare providers. And so it'll be interesting to see if we pass this today or we pass this year through this process, whether our own CMA, who are now sidelined, come back and try to undo what they did by their silence. Certainly the oncologists are not silent. I have a flyer from the Association of Northern California Oncologists and the Medical Oncology Association of Southern California. And these are the doctors that deal with dying more than anybody. They're the cancer doctors. They deal with this on a regular basis. They're the ones that have to come in to the patient, to the family, and explain that they have glioblastoma or some other terminal illness. Nobody wants to hear that. And we've heard a lot of comment about how people take that, but it's never taken good. You don't sit and rejoice, wow, I've got the good one. You know, it's depressing. And in fact, we've heard today that pain is one reason that people cite for wanting to terminate their life. They fear what it's going to be like, much like you wouldn't want to go out by fire, or for me, drowning is particularly repugnant. But how we die elicits different kind of fears depending what the method is. But when Oregon did their presentation of data in 2014, pain was not a top of the list. It was really about 25% of the physicians attending said that 25% was pain, but 91.5% said that loss of autonomy. You know, they couldn't do what they used to do. 88.7% decreasing ability to participate in activities that made life enjoyable. 79% loss of dignity. Yeah, dying, you lose a lot of dignity there. 50% loss of control of bodily functions. Burden on family was mentioned once before, 40%. These are all serious issues, but pain was 25%. But there was the palliative care people, and I have a quote here somewhere, I won't bother to read it, but he said that he specializes in this, and he talked about how in all of his years of experience, he's never had a patient who he could not ameliorate their pain. And we had the pharmacist from Temecula detail that we do indeed, through modern science, have some amazing ways to take pain out of the equation, and those that specialize in it certainly have that available. And so, you know, this is a difficult discussion. It's something we don't want to enter into lightly. Yeah, there's a choice for people, and that's what you're giving them, but is it a choice that's ours to give? The Supreme Court has not said we have a right to die. They basically say we have a right to pull the plug and not be held by artificial means, but we don't have a right to take our own lives. In fact, if you look in Oregon, when they list the cause of death, it is a drug overdose in Oregon, not the underlying condition. And if they're really honest, they would say a physician-supplied drug overdose or something like that, that basically talks about how somebody else handed them the tool that took them. Again, these are weighty things, but I want to suggest that at the end of the day, we be real reticent about crossing this threshold. We have heard the Hippocratic Oath that doctors take. It's about promoting life. It's not about promoting death. And yes, I have family illustrations as well. My mother was diagnosed with brain cancer. She was given 6 weeks without surgery, 6 months with surgery. And she said, I'm not going to go through the expense for that. I'll take what comes. She lived about 4 years. 3.5 of those were very good. And we were blessed the day before she died for her to be very lucid because she had lost her memory. About 6 months before that, the tumor was pressing on an area that affected memory. But the day before, she was able to call us all by name, explain personal experiences, and it was a real blessing. Now, if she had taken a pill sometime before to not be a burden on us, we would have been denied that very life-giving, inspiring ability that she embraced dying. She embraced it, and she faced it. I had a brother. You all met him on the floor if you were here just a few years ago. He introduced him. He had brain cancer as well, different stream than my mom did. He was given 2 years to live when he was diagnosed. He had surgery, took some experimental drugs, lived 2.5 years. There again, he was able to take the time, and it was depressing. He went through some pretty tough times during that. But he was also able to punch out some points on the bucket list of life that we all sort of have but never quite get around to it. And except for the last little bit, it was a tough time for him. And I spent some of that time with him, but never once did he say, hey, put me out of my misery. And so I do think that how we embrace death says something to us, not just as a person or as a people, but as a society as well. I think we want to keep our medical professionals looking out for our best interests. We don't require that they get a psychiatric evaluation, but those things that I read from Oregon, the reasons why that they listed for wanting to have this assistance into the afterlife, those accompany clinical depression. But only 5.5% of these patients were sent to a psychiatrist for a diagnosis. Now, this bill is permissive. if somebody sees it, they can send it, but what regular physician deals with this every day? Psychiatrists do, and perhaps that's a waypoint that we ought to have that would give one other level of security. I don't think I could support it even then, but it at least would allow a mental professional to evaluate whether this is something that is temporary or not. One thing I can tell you, we have all made decisions in our lives that we have later regretted. This is the decision you don't walk away from. You get no redos. Whether they're young and their brains are incapable of making those decisions, as we have talked about in other bills, or they're older and they just, had temporary depression. This is a path you don't come back from, and I think it's wrong, and I urge a no vote.
Senator Galgiani.
Before I worked in the legislature, I worked in a hospital for 8 years, and I worked in an ICU unit, and I had the occasion to work with those who were at the end stages of their life. I worked with patients who were in comas, and I worked with patients where I had to watch their families make decisions about how to end their life. And that's because we have the science that allows us to prolong life. And with that science comes the moral obligation to consider a number of different things. When you're prolonging someone's life, if you decide to give them fluids to keep them alive, if they also need to be fed with an NG tube, do you go that next step to keep that patient alive? And if that patient's heart stops, do you go that next step to resuscitate them? Some patients have made decisions about their end-of-life care before they go into a hospital, and some have do not resuscitate instructions that they give to their doctors ahead of time. But not everyone does, and in cases where they don't, families have to struggle with whether to give a family member fluids, food through an NG tube, and whether to resuscitate them. Those are all very painful and difficult moral decisions that come with the gift of science that allows us to prolong life. And now we have the gift of science that allows us to end suffering. And like the gift of prolonging life, the gift of ending suffering carries many moral obligations. And that's why we've had such a thoughtful yet difficult discussion on the floor here today. I'm supporting the bill because I believe that it is very thoughtful and it is very compassionate. And instead of giving people one choice or two choices to continue suffering or to end their life by committing suicide, which is shocking and painful for families because it is so abrupt, this bill gives guidance to someone who's dying, it gives guidance to their caregivers, and it gives guidance to their families about whether everything has been considered that should be considered when this transition from this life to the next life occurs. This is a very thoughtful bill, and it will give loved ones the ability to move to their next life without guilt, without shame, and it will give loved ones the chance to say goodbye to their families.